All right, I have worked up my courage to finally tell a story about childhood trauma. I was super triggered last week, and I had been gonna start telling different stories, but an individual from my childhood passed away, and I had to attend a funeral. And there's so many layers to this because, first of all, the first person that greeted me when I walked in the door to the funeral home was the first person who SA'd me as a very young child. I was 3. And that I was not expecting to see him at the funeral. He lives out of state, thankfully. And there are other people at the funeral that were aware of the abuse. And I was really taken aback that nobody chose to share with me that he was there. So I walked in alone, and that was the first person that greeted me, which is just weird because I'm like, do you not think that I remember? Or, like, there's no way that he doesn't remember what he did to me, right? Anyway, I digress because that's a different story for a different day. This story is about the person who passed away, and not necessarily the person that passed away, but a series of events that happened. And so when I was a very young child, we lived on a farm, and my mom was super young, and my stepdad had a whole bunch of older kids. They weren't children at the time. There was one that was 3 years older than me. The rest were much older, either late teens or even in their early 20s. And there's a big age difference between my mom and my stepdad. Anyway, so we lived on a farm far, far away from any people. There were no lights. So this one day, my parents, my mom and my stepdad went out and left us home, my brother and I, he was 3 years younger than me, to be babysat by a whole gaggle of ridiculousness. And I'm sure, like, my mom was so young, and it was the 70s, so I'm sure she wasn't thinking that it was such a bad thing. I don't know. But regardless, the individual that passed away he could be a really kind person, but he could also be an absolute terror. Like, he was a humongous bully, especially when he was younger. Like, and later years, he was really kind to me. Like, he knew that I was really into arts and crafts, and like, so Christmas time would come around and he would go out of his way to like give me gifts that were arts and crafts and stuff like that. But that was years later. This particular one of these nights, there was a bunch of them, and they decided that they were going to scare the crap out of me and my younger brother. And I was probably about 6 at the time, and he was about 3, maybe 7 and 4, something like that. And they decided that it would be funny if they turned off all the lights in the house. Now, again, this is the 70s. There's no ambient light from anything at all. It's like you're on a farm, there's weird sounds, it's an old farmhouse, and there's no lights. I mean, there's not even like a light from a clock. So it was pitch black. They were scaring the hell out of us. And at that point, I was in absolute terror, like beyond. I was a tiny little kid. And so I started screaming, and I was screaming, and I was stomping my feet up and down, and I'm like, stop, stop. And the individual that passed away, he was laughing. He was in his 20s, and he turned the lights on, and he said, oh, only goats, because, I mean, we live in a farm, so of course there's the goat reference. Only goats stomp their feet and throw a fit like that. So we're going to call you Gail the goat from now on. Which and then I started crying, and it was terror. It sounds funny now, but it wasn't at the time. I was a tiny little kid. So at that point, then he decided that he was going to take it further, and he said, oh, you know what? I'm hungry. We're going to have goat steaks for dinner. And he proceeded to then pick me up and take me outside, open up the grill, and set me on the grill and pretend to light it, because they were going to cook goat steaks, and I was now Gail the goat. And the terror of that night, I felt like it went on forever. There were other nights as well, but that one in particular. So then I got the nickname Gail the goat, which is so ironic that goat is like it's a good thing nowadays, like greatest of all time. But at that point in my life, hearing Gail the goat was like, it stirred up so many emotions. It was I was a really vulnerable person or child. And so every time somebody called me Gail the goat, I would get really upset. I would cry. And then, so fast forward a few years later, and we moved. The farm was sold. We moved to a different school district, not far away, but different school district. And so the stepbrother that was just 3 years older than me he'd lived with his mom at some point in that school district, and he was super popular, like super, super popular, like the most popular kid in school. And I was super messed up because I had all this trauma nobody knew about what's going on. And so I was in 4th grade, and I was desperate to make friends, and we were all lined up like double file or whatever, and we were walking down the hallway. Didn't know any of these kids. I was trying to make friends, and here comes my stepbrother, and he zeroes in on me. They all know him already because he's the most popular kid at the school, and they're like, oh, hey, and he zeroes in on me, and he's like, oh, look, you got Gail in your classroom? Lucky you. But he said it like mean. And he goes, well, you all know that we call her Gail the goat, right? So if you really want to upset her, just call her Gail the goat. And so they all started calling me Gail the goat. And I started crying. And of course, that set the tone for the rest of my time at that school. I was in 4th grade then, and that continued until 8th grade. I couldn't make a friend to save my life. And then some of it followed me through. It followed for years, that Gail the goat. And it was like, even nowadays, there will be somebody from childhood who will just like funny and be like, oh, hey, Gail the goat. And it still hurts. It's amazing how a trauma like that will get you. And the funeral triggered all that whole string of memories. And so I have been off my rocker for the last few days. So that was my story time, one of them.